In the deep past, the hominin family tree had many branches. And we've talked about Australopithecus and Homo habilis and Homo erectus, among others. But of all these species, only Homo sapiens has survived. Now think about that. Imagine a healthy and robust tree. But wait, reimagine that tree now, and this time, every single branch is dead, all except for one. Just one living branch with one leaf. My friends, that's us. It's kind of like one of those terrible horror movie classics, right? Where one by one, everyone starts disappearing. And here we are, the last ones left. So maybe we'd be wise to consider how we've stayed around all these years if we want to avoid the fate of Homo erectus and Australopithecus. So today, we're going to begin looking at the factors that helped Homo sapiens remain the sole remaining survivor of the family tree. Specifically, we'll turn to archaeology to dig up some answers. First, we'll clear up what archaeologists actually do, and then we'll visit a few archaeological sites to see how the creation of tools is, well, one of the reasons we're sole survivors. As we discussed in our previous lectures, archaeology is one of the four major subfields of anthropology. We've seen how biological anthropology, our first subfield, teaches us about our origins, our evolutionary history, and even the very nature of human variation. So, what does archaeology, as the second major subfield of anthropology, what does it bring to the table? Well, archaeology can not only tell us a lot about when and where humans have lived, but it can also tell us wonderfully curious details about how humans lived. From the mundane details of daily food production to the development of agriculture, urban centers, and iPads, archaeology, it covers it all. But how? What do archaeologists do that we don't typically get from, say, historians, social scientists, and others who explore the complex epic of our humanity? Well, put simply, they tell the history of humankind by revealing the history of things. Now think of it this way. If I were knocking at your door this very moment, if you greeted me and let me in, what would I see? What would all those things in your home reveal to me about your life and the things that you value? Well, as I enter your foyer, I see 3 pairs of worn jogging shoes and a rolled up yoga mat. And that tells me you're likely an avid runner who at least dabbles in some yoga or some other fitness routine. But then I walk through your amazing kitchen and I notice that your trash is filled with takeout dinner boxes, like the ones I see over there on your coffee table. There's 50% of them, they're sushi containers. There's 30% look like they're from a Mexican restaurant, and over there, there's 20%, that's pizza boxes. So, you know what? If you ever come to eat at my house, I now know 3 kinds of meals you're sure to like. So, just by looking at your things, I can learn about you. And that's what archaeologists do. They investigate, retrieve, and interpret the material remains of humans, the things we humans leave behind. So let's dig deeper. Let's work out exactly what we mean when we say archaeology. For most people, when we think of archaeology, our imagination conjures up exotic scenes with Indiana Jones narrowly escaping treasure hunters and Nazis while hunting down the Ark of the Covenant. And I'll tell you what, man, it's not exactly an insult that some folks think of us anthropologists as adventurous globetrotters digging in the dirt, but actually there's better metaphors out there for what archaeologists actually do. If you want to keep with the fictional characters, we'll avoid Indiana Jones and Lara Croft Tomb Raider, and instead we'll go with a couple less intrepid characters. Archaeologists, they're actually more of a mix between, say, Hercule Poirot of Agatha Christie fame and Marty McFly from Back to the Future. That is to say, part detective and part time traveler. Why? Well, as time-traveling detectives, archaeologists try and figure out what humans were up to long after they're gone. The archaeologist tracks down, classifies, and analyzes the material remains of people who are no longer present to speak for themselves. And by analyzing these material remains, things like tools, for example, we learn not only about the daily lives of our ancestors, but also how humans adapted over years on the path to our sole survivor status. So, in short, archaeology is the perfect subfield for seeking answers to why we're the sole survivors on the hominin family tree. But before we visit some archaeological sites to see how the creation of stone tools helped carry humankind into the 21st century, let's finish our abridged introduction to archaeology with a few specific examples of archaeologists at work. There are all kinds of specializations within anthropology and archaeology, but we can take a few moments to look at 3 exciting ways anthropologists do this thing called archaeology. First, let's go to one of my absolute favorite branches of the archaeological family. It's called experimental archaeology. Now, experimental archaeologists, they're fun because they not only explore and interpret the archaeological record, but these anthropologists go a step further. They actually recreate the technology and tools of their research populations because they want to probe their lives and minds, right? I mean, it's one thing to find and study a stone tool, but I guarantee you this, that you'll have a lot more respect for and you'll better understand the earliest stone tool makers once you try to recreate their handiwork. Later in this lecture, we'll explore the early history of human tool making. But first, let's get a glimpse into the breadth of archaeology by checking out 3 compelling specializations. First on our list, we'll visit Polynesia for a thrilling example of experimental archaeology. Have you heard of Thor Heyerdahl and maybe his Kon-Tiki? While living on a remote Polynesian island with his wife, Thor Heyerdahl, he researched regional cultural traditions as well as the local flora and fauna. And he noted that local plant and animal life actually migrated over the millennia in the same direction of regional ocean currents. So Heyerdahl drew evolutionary paths connecting the spread and distribution of the region's animal life. And that got him thinking. He turned his gaze to the humans and to their Pacific migrations. Ultimately, he became engrossed in exploring the possibility of human contact between pre-Columbian Polynesians and American populations. And like any good scientist, Heyerdahl set out to test his theory that the earliest Americans were in contact with Polynesian groups over 1,000 years ago. So in 1947, he built a balsa raft and he set sail from Peru, destination Polynesia. Heyerdahl and his crew, they left most of their modern conveniences at home. They did bring a basic radio, some cooking supplies, a few cameras, and believe it or not, even a parrot. But that was it. And in short, Heyerdahl, he was practicing experimental archaeology. He was recreating a technology of the past in order to seek answers to a historical question. And the journey, it started in late April with the stars and Pacific currents as their guides, and some 3.5 months and over 4,000 miles later, their raft, the Kon-Tiki, it reached the Tuamotu Islands in French Polynesia. They actually made it. So you can see the historic footage of this journey in the 1950 Academy Award-winning documentary, Kon-Tiki. Now, this remarkable journey, it doesn't prove definitively that ancient Peruvians visited the Polynesian islands, but it does show us that pre-Columbian contact between South Americans and Polynesians, well, that's entirely plausible. Humans could have, technically speaking, made it from Peru to Polynesia without equipment from the modern era. And here's the thrilling update. Despite decades of critiques, more recent genetic studies, they keep the door open to the idea of pre-Columbian trans-Pacific relationships. In fact, recent analysis of the genomes of living Polynesian islanders actually supports this idea. Their DNA, it includes a shared genetic legacy with Native Americans that dates back to just after Polynesians populated Easter Island and the Hawaiian Islands. So, scientists, they've yet to agree on which group was first to take the trans-Pacific journey, and only future research will bring us closer to an answer. But one fruitful place that we might turn to is our second archaeological specialization, and that's underwater archaeology. Think about it. Over 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. So if archaeologists are going to search for traces of humanity in every nook and corner of the world, some of them better look beneath the surface of the sea. So tracing human migrations across the Bering Strait into the Americas, for example, that's one project that needs help from underwater archaeology. As sea levels, as they rise and fall over the centuries, the footsteps and remains of many of the earliest Americans, they're most certainly on the ocean floor. But we talked about Paleo-American studies in a previous lecture, so instead, let's go to another exciting example of underwater archaeology research. That's the recovery and preservation of shipwrecks. If we sail just off the coast of Beaufort, North Carolina, for example, we'll find the site where researchers discovered the pirate Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. And besides navigation equipment, cannons, guns, and gold, archaeologists also unearthed things like kitchen utensils and personal possessions like game pieces and smoking pipes, all of which help us reconstruct what life was like for sailors in the early 1700s. But one thing we've definitively learned is that Blackbeard, he actually offered his crew a medical plan. And seriously, his ship doctors, they dealt with everything from bullet wounds and dysentery to scurvy, burns, and, well, much worse. But I tell you, don't be too jealous of this pirate perk, because shipboard healthcare in 1717 was anything but painless. The doctor's med kit included measuring devices as well as a mortar and pestle for mixing up medicine. There was even a clyster pump for delivering enemas, and worst of all, a mercury syringe for treating syphilis. So we'll leave underwater archaeology with Blackbeard in North Carolina for now and move on to the third area that will round out our cursory glimpse at the specializations and applications of contemporary archaeology. Now, for all of you who love visiting our national parks, our third example of archaeological work brings us to cultural resource management. The idea of cultural resource management is an intentional parallel to natural resource management. Just as scientists preserve and study natural resources, some archaeologists, well, they apply their talents to preserving, studying, and even sharing a wide variety of cultural resources. For the Tennessee Valley Authority, CRM work included the management of over 9,000 archaeological sites, the relocation of cemeteries, and collaborative research and management of cultural resources on Native American lands. Another example of cultural resource management work takes us to the Nashville Sounds baseball stadium on the banks of the Cumberland River. And because the stadium was built in an area known for artifacts from early Native American settlements, cultural resource management archaeologists were on the scene to facilitate excavations and ensure that important archaeological artifacts were not destroyed or disturbed by the construction process. And similar work, it's done all throughout the US and even throughout the world. UNESCO, the cultural, scientific, and educational wing of the United Nations, actually manages the World Heritage Center, and its World Heritage list, it has over 1,000 extraordinary heritage sites. And one site, which archaeologists and others will be exploring and preserving for centuries to come, is Timbuktu in Mali, West Africa. Timbuktu is a center of Islamic scholarship, and it housed a treasure trove of ancient manuscripts, most of which have yet to be translated. Now, these remarkable volumes, they contain the intellectual work of generations of premier scholars from all over the world, dating from the 15th century and even earlier. So there we have it. Cultural resource management, underwater archaeology, and experimental archaeology. These specializations give us a quick picture of the breadth of contemporary archaeology. Nonetheless, archaeologists, they do so much more. Some archaeologists focus on specific regions and time periods like, say, Pharaonic Egypt or classical Greece, while others, they look at themes like development of agriculture or conquest or even pottery production. And in all of these endeavors, archaeologists continue to find evidence that helps us understand the question, how have humans survived when other hominin species have gone extinct? And nothing in the archaeological record speaks more directly to that question than human tools. So, for the final piece of our archaeological adventure, let's turn to a classic archaeological subject, stone tools. Let's visit some archaeological sites to dig up the early history of human tool making. Our first destination, it's a dried up riverbed in Kenya. And that's where, in both 2011 and 2012, anthropologists discovered some of the oldest hominin tools we've ever found to date. They found over 100 artifacts that show us that upright apes, or hominins, we were making tools some 3 million years ago. And the next oldest tool we've unearthed, well, it dates to about 2.6 million years ago and was found in neighboring Ethiopia, note, still in East Africa. Now, this tool style, which we call the Oldowan toolkit, is a very early type of a manufactured stone tool that was widely adopted by our hominin ancestors. Archaeologists and paleoanthropologists, they've found Oldowan tools throughout East Africa, all the way down into southern Africa. And they also found, at these Oldowan sites, clear use of fire. Of course, if we're now butchering meat, it's probably time for a fire and some barbecue, right? So, our Homo habilis ancestors, they were quick to develop and adopt this Oldowan tool production as part of their survival strategy, and it was likely one of the reasons upright walking apes survived and eventually evolved into modern tool-using Homo sapiens like you and me. And that's because Oldowan tools, they opened up new ways of feeding ourselves, among other things. And we're not talking about just banging a walnut open with a rock here, right? In general, the Oldowan tool style is known as a chopper. It had a single intentionally crafted blade, which was perfect for butchering. And with these new tools, Homo habilis broke through thick hides, they got to the meat, and even cracked bones to get to the marrow. And remarkably, Homo habilis lived in an era when Africa was in a drying trend, and that was, again, remember, 2 to 3 million years ago. And these tools, they're material evidence for the creative ingenuity of Homo habilis adapting to new ecologies and forging new food systems. We hominins sometimes know a good thing when we see one, and Oldowan tool making was like Wi-Fi. It was game-changing. It was a technology that spread like wildfire, and it did usher in new waves of human innovation. Our next destination on our stone tool adventure here is a site named Saint-Achul in northern France. And that's where in 1847 we discovered fossil evidence of the next great leap forward in tool making. Now, this new tool type, it's referred to as the Achulian style, and that's been found in southern Africa, across East Africa, and even into the Mediterranean world, say southern Europe and Asia as well. And with its revolutionary design, this Achulian tradition, it produced one of those all-in-one household gadgets, right? It slices, it dices, it chops, it grinds, it cracks, it digs, a whole lot more. These hand axes, they were slightly larger than the Oldowan tools that they came to replace in the archaeological record. And uniquely, they had a signature symmetrical teardrop shape, and they were symmetrically crafted on both sides. Achulian tool making essentially emerges with the arrival of Homo erectus. And confirming the Homo erectus connection, archaeologists discovered Achulian tools in Africa that date back to well over 1.5 million years ago, and then slightly after that in Asia and into Europe. And as specialized tool makers honed their skills over the generations, Achulian knappers, that's what anthropologists call tool makers, they eventually started what was a transition into our third and final destination on this stone tool safari. As knappers became more specialized, they became experts at selecting and shaping the best materials into a remarkable toolkit. In the beginning of the Achulian tradition, knappers started with what's called a core stone, and they used a hammerstone to chip away at the stone tool they had pictured in their mind. So over time, knappers found more and more uses for the sharp flakes that splintered off from the core stone during the crafting of that larger hand axe. So the archaeological record, it shows that knappers were clearly in the business of making core stone tools and those flake tools I just mentioned, just as Homo sapiens are emerging in the fossil record some 200,000 years ago. It appears that the Achulian tradition that came to include the creation of smaller flake tools kept humans alive almost into the modern age. But one last major technique in stone tools, it burst into the archaeological record some 12,000 years ago. And remember, that's right around the time that the most recent ice age drew to a close. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, humans were releasing their newest stone technology. It's called the microlith. Lith is from the ancient Greek word lithos, meaning stone. And that's how we get the term Mesolithic. Meso, or middle, plus lith gives you Mesolithic, meaning Middle Stone Age. Add the prefix micro instead, and we get microlith, or small stone. The hallmark technological innovation of the Middle Stone Age was this microlith, a tool-making tradition that provides a thrilling example of Homo sapiens mastering the art of ecological adaptation in the face of existential crisis. Let's take a closer look at the napping techniques that spread with humans all across the planet just before the development of agriculture. Now, when we talk about stone tool making, we're with the Flintstones in the Stone Age. And that's defined by an era in which humans relied on stone as their primary material for making tools. I mean, it's important to note that the Stone Age is split into 3 different eras. First, Oldowan and Acheulean tool making occurred in the Old Stone Age, or the Paleolithic. The tools our ancestors made back then helped them deal with their natural environment, which for most of the Paleolithic included the most recent Ice Age. The Northern Hemisphere, it was covered in ice for about 1.5 million years. But nonetheless, turning our lemons into lemonade, our ancestors created tools for cooperatively hunting and processing the huge mammoth and other big game that roamed the earth during the Paleolithic. But as George Harrison warned us, all things must pass. And after 1.5 million years, so went the Ice Age. And melting ice sheets and rising sea levels, they weren't the only changes humans were going to have to get used to. You see, as landscapes dramatically transformed from tundra to forests, savannas, and mountains, the animal population changed too. So the big game many of us relied on for so long for our survival, it followed the path into extinction, and humans, they needed a new toolkit to chase the more plentiful, yet much smaller and flighty prey like deer, boar, and rabbits. And it was microliths that answered this need. The range of microliths that have been unearthed by archaeologists, it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, these small tools were made of flint or chert, another sedimentary rock, and very highly skilled knappers manufactured points that were, less than a centimeter wide. And by making an array of very small stone tools that could be affixed to arrows and spears, Mesolithic humans effectively transitioned out of the Ice Age and into a radically new world. In other words, we see once more how tool-making allowed us to adapt to our environment, embolden our food system, and, again, sustain our ongoing survival. So, we've seen humans making stone tools in the Paleolithic and the Mesolithic ages, but we haven't really talked about the Neolithic or the New Stone Age. Actually, on the cosmic scale, we're not missing much. You see, by the time the Neolithic age comes around some 10,000–12,000 years ago, humanity's Stone Age success story, it was already written in these small stones. And with the development of our stone tool traditions, our ancestors eventually created the microlith. And with that microlith in hand, humankind stopped merely surviving, and instead, we started thriving. And I'll put it this way. Prior to the microlith tool making, right, the human population was barely 100,000 people total. But with that microlith in hand, and with the Ice Age behind us, our human population, it exploded to several million in a span of just 5,000 years. I mean, think about that. We learned in the previous lecture that it took almost 7 million years to evolve from the first upright walking apes into a small population of Homo sapiens using stone tools in Africa. But then, when Homo sapiens unleashed this microlith some 12,000 years ago, our species literally grows from thousands to millions of individuals spread all across the planet. And that is no small feat. Today, we took a closer look at archaeology as one of the 4 subfields of anthropology. And then we did some time travel back into the Paleolithic. Specifically, we visited the archaeological record to reconstruct the history of human tool-making in the Stone Age. And we saw it. We saw that humans refined our stone toolkits over the millennia, and that those adaptations, they certainly played a major role in Homo sapiens' exclusive status as the sole surviving hominin and to our success in populating the planet. For me, one of the most fascinating facts about the Stone Age tools is that they stand up to the test of time, even despite the great blades produced today with steel. I mean, one example would be the stone blades made by contemporary Kanso women toolmakers in Eastern Africa. They create specialized stone scrapers that to this day are studied from afar, and it's because they're more efficient than commercially manufactured alternatives. You know, these Kanso women, they're not making stone tools because they can't afford steel ones at the market. They make stone tools because they're efficient. They're efficient for common local tasks, such as processing hides. A more local example of the timeless sophistication of stone tools is obsidian blades. I mean, humans have made razor-sharp blades with obsidian for thousands of years, and they're not about to stop just because we figured out some digital printing here. In fact, some surgeons prefer to use obsidian scalpels for surgeries precisely because their blades can be 4 to 5 times sharper than surgical steel. And that means that these sharper blades, they'll reduce scar width, they'll reduce healing time, and even inflammation. Not so bad for a Stone Age technology, huh? Of course, humans weren't content with a kit that included only stone tools, and eventually we would shift to tools made of bronze, iron, and other materials. But the big picture says it all. We went from Oldwan tools to iPads and nanotechnology in about 2.5 million years. And the ancient ingenuity of technological innovation, right? It's clearly evident in the craft of our ancestors' stone tools. The hand axes, the blades, and the flake tools that fed them and sustained the survival of our species.